Good morning. Good morning. Appreciate you tuning in. Happy Wednesday morning to you. My name is Jacob Thornton. I'm a Christian. I'm a member of the Church of Christ. Today, we're going to continue our study, which is today's part 3 on the book of Revelation. And I'm excited for it. And I hope that you are too. And we talked about for the past 2 days, this is a deep topic. This is a deep subject in which some individuals just aren't ready to comprehend. They're not ready mentally to accept these things. But that's okay. This might be a new teaching introduced to individuals where they never heard it explained this way, and that's okay too. But this is the best possible interpretation out of all the interpretations, and so that's what we're going to be going over. And I just want to appreciate y'all for tuning in. We got 5 viewers right now. If you're tuning in, you go ahead and say good morning, and it'll pop up right here on the screen. Everyone can see that you're tuning in. I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and I got some good feedback. And Acts chapter 1, verse 9 mentioned Jesus ascending into heaven with the clouds. And they said, I thought that Daniel chapter 7 was about the ascension of Jesus with the clouds of heaven to the Father. And that's a good conversation starter. But the ascension of Jesus into heaven with the clouds is not a reference to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, in context, the ascension is Jesus coming in judgment against Rome and receiving the authority which they had just lost. Stacy, appreciate you tuning in. Thank you. Good morning. And yesterday I had another conversation with someone who sent me a message and said that the churches of Christ began in the 19th century, and I sent him Romans 16:16. Now, the churches of Christ couldn't have began in the 19th century because we read about them existing in the 1st century. The churches of Christ salute you. So either you're going to believe God inspired Paul to write this, or you're going to believe the man behind Wikipedia. And so I'd rather believe God that the churches of Christ didn't begin in the 1st century or begin in the 19th century. They began in the 1st century. And if you want to be a member of the church, there's no other church that you should be a member of than the Church of Christ. There's only one church. There's one body. And our study today is concerning a letter that was written to the churches of Christ in the 1st century. And something which I wanted us to understand is a lot of people don't understand this, that the Bible talks about a coming of Christ, which is not a reference to his final coming. And I think if we can get that in our head, we'll do better with the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation talks about a coming of Christ, and individuals in their head think, oh, Jesus only has a second coming, which is at the end of the world, and therefore the coming of Christ in the book of Revelation is about the end of the world. But that's not the case. Daniel chapter 7 mentions a coming of Christ, which is not him coming at the end of the world. Daniel 7 mentions a coming of Christ and a judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. So just because we read about this coming of Christ against Rome, does that mean that Jesus won't come at the end of the world? No, it doesn't. Jesus will come at the end of the world. Right, here's a coming of Jesus against the Roman government during the time of their 8th Roman emperor to unleash punishment, as the text explains. But Jesus' final coming will raise the dead. Right, this coming already occurred. This judgment against Rome during their 8th Roman emperor already occurred, but the resurrection of the dead has not yet occurred. And yesterday we looked at some of the things which the book of Revelation has different doctrinally about the so-called end of the world than the rest of the New Testament, because the book of Revelation is not meant to be taken doctrinally about what will happen at the end of the world. We looked at yesterday. You can watch some of those videos. Dave Thornton, appreciate you tuning in. Good morning, good day. And today we're going to continue this topic, this conversation about the coming of the Son of Man as mentioned in the book of Revelation. And someone might ask the question, is it mentioned anywhere else in the New Testament besides the book of Revelation? Right. Daniel 7 mentions this coming of the Son of Man against the 4th kingdom, against Rome. Does anywhere else in the New Testament mention Jesus coming in judgment against Rome besides the book of Revelation? And that's a good question. And the answer is yes, it does. But let's notice again, Daniel chapter 7, verse 13. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. And if we remember the study from yesterday, if you scroll up, where was the Ancient of Days? Well, the Ancient of Days set his thrones down, and the Ancient of Days was sitting. And here is a judgment scene, it says, against the horn and the beast, which is a reference to Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. The Father was in the judgment. Here's a judgment scene, right? It says, the thrones were cast down, the Ancient of Days did sit. Here's a judgment scene, and this isn't a judgment scene about the end of the world. This is a judgment scene of Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And verse 13 is a continuation. It is the same context as the previous verses. And it says, the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. Well, where's the Ancient of Days? Well, in this context, the Ancient of Days isn't pictured as in heaven. This isn't a reference to Jesus' ascension. This is a reference to Jesus coming to the Ancient of Days, who's sitting in judgment against Rome. And Jesus would receive that authority which Rome had just lost. And we read about the 4 kingdoms: Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Babylon had the kingdom first, then Medo-Persia took the kingdom from Babylon, then Greece, led by Alexander the Great, took the kingdom from Medo-Persia, then Rome took the kingdom from Greece. Now Rome possessed the kingdom. Who would take the kingdom from Rome? Right? It's pictured as God is going to judge Rome, take the kingdom from them, and he would give that kingdom to his son, and his son would share that authority, that dominion, with his saints, with his people. And so again, this isn't reference to exactly when Jesus received all authority. We know Jesus received all authority when he ascended into heaven, but this is a picture, right? It's an image of the judgment of Rome, and that authority that they lost is seen as being possessed by the Messiah. But really, Jesus received authority over Rome at his ascension. So this isn't meant to be a doctrine about when Jesus received his authority over Rome, because we read in the New Testament that happened at his ascension. But what we learn is that there would be a judgment taking place against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And the question that we were asking was, does the New Testament mention a coming of Christ against Rome that's not at the end of the world? And the answer is yes. And we're going to find that in the Olivet Discourse. And we're going to find that when Jesus stood before the council and they asked them the question. We have Life Experience commenting from YouTube, says, good. I appreciate you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. The Olivet Discourse is so misunderstood. I think, about 15 videos on the Olivet Discourse because it's found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And there's 3 subjects under consideration, basically. Well, there's more, but in each account, this is what they explain is going to happen. The Christians are going to be persecuted by the Jews and the Gentiles. But God would punish the Jews and God would punish the Gentiles. And then there's the subject under consideration about the end of the world. And so there's different subjects under consideration in this. And they ask Jesus the question about the end of the age, right? The end of the world. This is a reference to the end of the world. And Jesus tells them some things have to take place before the end of the world happens. And he tells them they're going to be persecuted. Judgment is going to be poured out upon their persecutors, the Jews. Punishment is going to be poured out upon their persecutors, the Gentiles, which is the Romans. And then Jesus' coming will be after those events take place, but no one knows when. Now, those events, the persecution of Christians, the punishment of the Jews, and the punishment of the Roman Gentiles, as predicted by Daniel chapter 7, would occur in their generation, in their lifetime. And one generation, some people say, oh, that's 40 years. Oh, that's 70 years. No, a generation, according to when Noah stepped off the ark, God gave a divine teaching that one generation is 120 years. And he said, man shall live 120 years. And so we read about Christians being persecuted in Matthew 24. Then you read about the destruction of Jerusalem. Right? Then shall be great tribulation. And this is a reference to the destruction of Jerusalem. And what some people fail to understand. Look, it says the destruction of Jerusalem is called that great tribulation. And then look what it says in verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days. So no longer is the destruction of Jerusalem being under discussion. The destruction of Jerusalem mentioned previously is the tribulation of those days. And here is a mentioning of the coming of the Son of Man immediately after the tribulation of those days. So this is a coming of the Son of Man after the destruction of Jerusalem. And it says, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of heavens shall be shaken. This is a reference to the fall of a nation. This is Old Testament apocalyptic language. And as seen from Revelation chapter 4, I think, 4 or 5, this is a reference to the fall of Rome. When the sun shall be darkened, the moon won't give her light, the stars will fall from heaven. Let's try to find that passage real quick. Is it Revelation 6? It's 6. And it says, the sun became black, the moon became as blood, the stars of heaven fell, right? And this is a reference to the judgment of the kings of the earth. This is a reference to the punishment of the Romans, the Gentiles. And so in Matthew 24, when we read about the fall of a nation as described as the sun going dark and the stars falling from heaven, that's not judgment against Jerusalem. We're past that now, right? After the punishment of Jerusalem, this is going to take place. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. This is found in Revelation chapter 1, and this is taken from Daniel chapter 7, the Son of Man coming in the clouds. In Daniel chapter 7, that's what we read. So what Jesus is explaining here is that the fall of Jerusalem would take place, and then Daniel 7 would be fulfilled during the time of the 8th Roman emperor. And it says, and he shall send his angels, and the word angels is messengers. There's no reason to believe that this is angelic angels, like heavenly angels, but this is a reference to human messengers, preachers of the gospel. It even said, when it said Jesus came after John, and John was a messenger sent before him, the same Greek word for angel, John was an angel sent before him, because the word angel means messenger. And so at the fall of Rome, guess what would continue? The kingdom of Christ. At the fall of Rome, Jesus would receive authority, pictured as Daniel 7, and then Jesus would still continue to send out his messengers with the sound of a trumpet, who would gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. And the reference from the four winds just means the ends of the earth. One end of heaven to the other is a reference to the ends of the earth, all nations. And so the Christians were being persecuted by the Jews. Well, God would punish the Jews with the destruction of Jerusalem, and the gospel would continue. And the Romans persecuted the Christians. Well, Daniel 7 would be fulfilled with this punishment being poured out upon Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And guess what would happen after that punishment of the Romans? The gospel would continue. And that's what's being presented in Matthew chapter 24, verse 31, that at the fall of Rome, the gospel would continue. And we know this isn't about the end of the world, because look what it says. End of verse 34. This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. And so this coming of Christ, this sending out of his angels, that would happen in that generation. Now, if individuals are saying that this is the final coming of Christ, then they would of necessity have to say that the final coming of Christ occurred in that generation. But that's not the case. So Jesus then tells them that these things must be fulfilled in that generation, and then he changes subjects. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour knoweth no one, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. So now the discussion has changed from the punishment of the Christians by their persecutors to the punishment of the Jews to the punishment of the Romans. And now the question is being answered regarding the end of the world. And it's the same thing in Mark chapter 13, right? But where did he get this language that this would happen in that generation? Where did this language come? The Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, right? That's not the final coming, because it was in that generation. Well, where in the Bible does it talk about a coming of the Son of Man with clouds that would occur in that generation? Well, Daniel chapter 7. Is it a reference to the final coming? No, it's not. That's why we read. So because this isn't a reference to the final coming, that's why this is limited to that generation. And after that generation, heaven and earth would pass away. It hasn't yet. It's still here. What does this tell us? Well, the coming of the Son of Man at the end of the world has not yet happened. In Mark chapter 13, we read the same thing, that Christians would be persecuted, right? And then we read that the Jews, the unbelieving Jews who persecuted the Christians, would suffer days of affliction. We read about the fall of Rome in those days after that tribulation, right? After the tribulation of the unbelieving Jews. So this is talking about something different. Now, this isn't talking about anymore the destruction of Jerusalem. It's talking about the fall of a nation. The sun shall be darkened. The moon shall not give her light. The stars shall fall from heaven. What is this a reference to? Well, as Revelation 6 says, this is a reference to the judgment of the kings of the earth. It's a Roman kingdom judgment, as mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. And again, this is not a reference to Jesus's final coming. You scroll down, and it says, this generation shall not pass till all these things be done. And so if an individual, as stated before, wants to say this is a reference to Jesus' final coming, well, the time statement limits this to that generation. So if you want to say that this is a reference to Jesus' final coming, then of necessity, you're going to have to admit that Jesus came his final time in that generation. And I don't think you'd be willing to admit that. So we have to try to understand this as a coming of the Son of Man that would occur in that generation after the destruction of Jerusalem. Where in the Bible does it talk about that? Where in the Bible does it talk about a coming of the Son of Man in that generation after the destruction of Jerusalem, which is not a reference to the final coming? Well, Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is the key to understanding this. And then again, just like Matthew 24, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour knoweth no man. So here, this is not limited to that generation, as previously stated. The rest of the chapter before this was limited to that generation, like the persecution of Christians, the destruction of Jerusalem, the fall of Rome as seen through the 8th Roman emperor, and then the subject changes to heaven and earth passing away, and that's not limited to that generation. It says no one knows when that's going to happen. But in order for heaven and earth to pass away, those things had to be fulfilled. Jerusalem had to be destroyed. The Roman government through the 8th Roman emperor had to be destroyed or punished, as Daniel chapter 7 says. Luke 21, the same thing, right? Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 are all the Olivet Discourse, and they all mention Daniel chapter 7. In Luke 21, look what it says. When you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is near, right? These be the days of vengeance. So that's judgment against Jerusalem. Then look what it says. And it says, they shall fall by the edge of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations. Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles. And look at this. It said, and this is verification that the subject changes, right? We read in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 that after the destruction of Jerusalem, that the punishment of Gentiles, the punishment of Rome, as prophesied by Daniel chapter 7, is under consideration. And this is only found one time in the Old Testament, right? The times of the Gentiles. That language is only found one time in the Old Testament, and you know what it's talking about? Punishment of the Gentiles. And so it's saying Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time for the punishment of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So this is the idea. God would use the Gentiles to punish Jerusalem, but guess what? The time's coming for the Gentiles to be punished also. And where do we read about that? Where do we read about the punishment of Rome? Daniel chapter 7. And it goes on to say, then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Where do we read about the Son of Man coming in a cloud in the Old Testament? Daniel chapter 7. And then you read after this, and it goes on to say, just like the other chapters, this generation shall not pass away till all these things be fulfilled. So if you say that the final coming of Christ is under consideration here, and Luke 21:27, the Son of Man coming in a cloud, then of necessity, by the time statement, you're going to have to say that that was fulfilled in that generation. And if you say that the Son of Man came, his final coming in that generation, then you're going to have to, of necessity, admit that the resurrection of the dead took place, that heaven and earth were destroyed, right? And I don't think that's something that you'd be willing to admit. But what we have to understand is that the coming of the Son of Man in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, in those passages was after the destruction of Jerusalem and limited to that generation. And is prophesied by Daniel 7. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. And he goes on to say that heaven and earth passing away will be a snare to all who dwell on the face of the whole earth. No one's going to this is real when heaven and earth really do pass away. No one knows when it's going to happen, and it's going to be a surprise. We have I don't know if it's a comment. Appreciate you tuning in from Facebook. Matthew 24:20. Even though Christ was being preached at this time, many were still living under the old law, so they would not be allowed to flee on the Sabbath. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Right? In the destruction of Jerusalem, if it was Sabbath day, the doors would have been shut, and so the destruction would have been greater. Because they wouldn't have been able to escape the city. However, history shows that the destruction of Jerusalem was not in the winter, and it was not on the Sabbath, which tells us that their prayers were answered. And right, good point. Let's see. So we seen Mark 24, Luke 13. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 are all about these events that would occur within that generation, which includes the destruction of Jerusalem, the punishment of Rome, and the final coming of Christ. Now, the book of Revelation is an expansion of Daniel 7, which is not about the destruction of Jerusalem. It's not about the end of the world. It's specifically about the coming of Christ and judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And if you can understand that, right? If you can, I've said this so many times, if you can understand Daniel 7, then you can understand the book of Revelation, right? You could read Daniel chapter 7 and find the main theme for the book of Revelation. Daniel 7 is not about the end of the world. Revelation is not about the end of the world. It might sound like it, but it's not. And I think that we've made those points, and we'll make those points again as we go over it. Yesterday, I said we're going to read today in Revelation chapter 4 and continuing. But I'd like to bring up a few points before we do that also. When Jesus stood before the council and they asked him the question, "Tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus saith unto him, "Thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." Right? So they ask him the question, "Are you the Christ?" Jesus basically quotes from Daniel chapter 7 and applies it to himself, right? The Son of Man coming with the clouds. Where is that from? Daniel 7. What is Daniel 7 about? Who is the Son of Man coming with the clouds in Daniel 7? It's the Christ. So they ask Jesus, "Are you the Christ?" And Jesus takes a scripture about the Christ and applies it to himself and says, "You have said it. Yes, I am." Right? Jesus applies a scripture about the Christ to himself. And they understood this. They understood that Jesus was applying Daniel 7 to himself. And they said, "He hath spoken blasphemy." So what did they understand when Jesus quoted this? Right? They ask him, "Are you the Christ?" Jesus quotes this scripture from Daniel 7. And they say, "Prophesy unto us, thou Christ." Right? They ask him the question, "Are you the Christ?" He quotes a scripture from Daniel 7 about the Christ, applies it to himself, basically saying, "Yes, I am." And so they mock him. "Tell us who hit you, thou Christ." Right? They understood even when Jesus was crucified. It said above him was the inscription, Jesus, the King of the Jews. And they said, "Don't write the King of the Jews, but write that he said he's the King of the Jews." Well, where did he write that he's the Christ, the King of the Jews? Where did Jesus state before them that he's the Christ, the King of the Jews? Well, right here, where he quoted Daniel chapter 7, a passage about the Christ, and applied it to himself. So Jesus admitted to Daniel 7 that he would fulfill it, and that's what the book of Revelation is about, Jesus fulfilling Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is not about the end of the world. And so in Daniel chapter 7, we read about a punishment of Rome during the time of the 8th Roman emperor. And that's what Revelation 17, 18, and 19 are about. The punishment of Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And so it's not too hard to understand. So the question was, does the Bible mention a coming of Christ against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor, which is not a reference to his final coming? Yes, it does. Daniel chapter 7. And so the Bible mentions a coming of Christ in judgment, which is not a reference to his final coming. It mentioned it in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Daniel chapter 7, Matthew 26, right? So I think we're just not familiar enough with these passages to be able to comprehend that yet, some of us, but the Bible does talk about it. And the more that you study those passages, you'll see that. And for those who are trying to understand, the Olivet Discourse, I would recommend to understand that it talks about the punishment of Christians by the Jews and Gentiles. Then God, because the Jews and Gentiles punished the Christians, which are God's holy, innocent people, the Jews would be punished, and then the Gentiles would be punished, right? And then once Daniel 7 was fulfilled, well, guess what? Heaven and earth could pass away at any time. And that's exactly what 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says. Some people think, who's the man of sin? Well, I personally think it's the same Roman emperor under consideration in Daniel 7 and the book of Revelation. And there's two ideas presented here which could be possible. Either when it says that the man of sin would be destroyed by Christ at his coming, it's not saying that the man of sin, right, that this Roman emperor would exist until Jesus comes. It's either giving a picture that, well, what is the ultimate end, right? What is the end of this man of sin? Well, when he meets Christ, he's going to be destroyed. Or it's this idea, just like, remember the Antichrist, in 1 John, he writes about this Antichrist and told them that the Antichrist was coming. And then he tells them there's many Antichrists. So the Antichrist is this attitude, right? This spirit, this behavior that entered into the world. And so it could be that this attitude of this man of sin, exalting himself under the New Testament above God, would be a characteristic entered into the world that would exist until the coming of Christ, right? We still see people with that behavior pattern today who exalt themselves above God and demand that they be worshiped. North Korea is one of those nations who's doing that today. But we'll look at this. So what we have to remember, 2 Thessalonians 2, and we're going to read that 2 Thessalonians 2, and we're going to make sense of it. Jesus mentioned in the Olivet Discourse, two things had to take place in order for heaven and earth to pass away, right? He said Jerusalem had to be destroyed, and the fall of Rome, as according to Daniel 7, had to take place. And so that's what Paul's writing to them about, telling them not to be worried that the day of Christ had already occurred or is occurring, because that Roman emperor had not yet been revealed. So he tells them that they shouldn't be worried that the day of Christ is about to happen until the Son of Man, or until the Roman emperor is revealed. We'll just go through this. Look what it says. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together to him, right? That's a reference to Jesus' final coming, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. This is mentioned in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, Daniel chapter 7, where this individual is revealed, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, so that he is God, sitteth in a temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And so here's this idea, just like in the Old Testament, the king of Babylon had this. And you might remember the scripture which calls the king of Babylon Lucifer, and he exalted himself above the stars of heaven. And so here is the picture of an authority, right, in a kingly position, exalting himself above God and causing the people to worship him, right? Well, who would this be? Well, Revelation, Daniel 7, say this would be a Roman emperor. He says, remember not that when I was with you, I told you these things, and now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. So here's the idea. There's some type of force restraining this individual from being revealed. So it could have been, the emperor ruling before him, could have been something else. But the idea is that there would come this individual who would demand worship, and he's not yet on the scene. And because this individual who would come was not yet revealed, they should not be troubled, as that the day of Christ is at hand. And look what it says. And then shall that wicked be revealed. So here would be the revealing of this individual. And what will be this individual's fate when the Son of Man, when Jesus comes, his final coming, and all individuals are gathered into his presence, all believers and unbelievers are cast out of his presence. This individual is exalting himself above God. And so Jesus, having that divine nature, being God, what does the fate of this individual look like when he meets the true God? Well, when he meets the Lord will consume him with the spirit of his mouth and destroy him with the brightness of his coming. And so the Son of Man, it says his coming is after the working of Satan with all powers and signs and lying wonders. And this is what we read about in the book of Revelation, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, and them not perish because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. This Roman emperor was demanding worship, and individuals were worshiping him. And we read in Revelation 13 that this Roman emperor entered onto scene with the help of an accomplice, which helped convince the world to worship him. And together, this Roman emperor and his accomplice, whoever it might be, were using false miracles. They're using signs in order to deceive the Roman multitudes into worshiping this 8th Roman emperor. And it says, for this cause shall God send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. If they wanted to believe that this person was exalted above God, God would let them believe it. But they're going to fall into the same category as this person, as this Roman emperor. But 2 Thessalonians 2:8, some individuals think, it says the wicked one would be revealed, and then the Son of Man, the Lord, would come and destroy him, as if the wicked one would endure until the time that Jesus came. But that's not what it's saying at all. It just says the wicked one would be revealed. Well, what is the fate of this wicked one when Jesus comes? Right? It doesn't say here that the wicked one would live until the coming of Christ. It just says the wicked one would be revealed. He wasn't yet revealed. But when the Lord comes, here's the fate of this wicked one who exalted himself above God. Well, he would be destroyed. Now, if this does mean that this type of wickedness would occur until the end, it doesn't mean that one individual would live until the coming of Christ. It just refers, just like the Antichrist, right? It seems like one individual, but it says, John wrote to them and said, I write to you because I told you that the Antichrist was coming. Even now, there are many Antichrists, right? So he tells them about the entering into the world of this one individual. And now many individuals have that characteristic. Well, this could be the same way, that under the New Testament, this characteristic of this person exalting themselves against God would not be obtained only by that one individual, but by many individuals. And that characteristic would continue to occur until Christ comes. And we know when Christ comes, he's going to destroy all enemies. And so this type of enemy who exalts itself against God is going to be destroyed. This characteristic, this behavior is going to be destroyed when Christ comes. So there's basically two possible explanations here, which we just went over regarding this passage. But I think personally that this has to do with the Roman emperor, and Jesus said in Matthew 24 that heaven and earth would not pass away, right? His final coming would not yet occur until Jerusalem was destroyed and Daniel 7 was fulfilled. And this wicked individual who's exalting himself above God, or all that is called God or that is worshipped, is in fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7. And so do we read about a coming of Christ after Daniel chapter 7? After the coming of Daniel chapter 7? Yes, we do. Because the coming of Christ in Daniel chapter 7 was a coming and a judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And once those things were fulfilled, once Jerusalem was destroyed, once Rome was judged through their 8th Roman emperor, then heaven and earth are ready to pass away at any time. And that's what he's telling them here. Don't worry that heaven and earth are about to pass away at this time, which the Thessalonians were worried about, which is why in chapter 3, he tells them, some of you aren't working. Like, you need to work. You need to eat your own bread, because they had this idea that heaven and earth were going to pass away at any moment. And so they were living as if heaven and earth were about to pass away. And so they weren't working. They were neglecting their duties. So Paul is telling them heaven and earth aren't literally about to pass away at the time this was being written, because this needed to be fulfilled. The 8th Roman emperor needed to be revealed. And once the 8th Roman emperor would be revealed, well, then heaven and earth could pass away any time, right? But it doesn't mean don't work. You still need to work. So it's been 2,000 years since this 8th Roman emperor would be revealed. And even though this 8th Roman emperor was revealed 2,000 years ago, heaven and earth could pass away today. Anytime heaven and earth could pass away. But does that mean that we shouldn't work? No, it doesn't. We should work, right? We should care for ourselves, as it says, eat our own bread. And so basically what we went over in today's video, I think this is turning out pretty good. In my head, it might be going too fast. I mean, if you guys are listening, we have 4 viewers right now. Do you think that this is a little bit too confusing? I know it's new to you. I know this idea. These are typically scriptures which you don't hear preached upon, right? They're kind of scriptures which are new to you, or if you have heard it, it's still kind of confusing a little bit. But basically what we went over today is Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 mention Daniel chapter 7. And Daniel chapter 7 is a picture of judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And even though we read about Jesus coming in the judgment against Rome during the 8th Roman emperor, there's still a coming of Christ in the future after that, when heaven and earth pass away, when the dead are raised, right? And the book of Revelation is about Daniel 7. And so it's not about his final coming. It's about the coming of Christ, as mentioned in Daniel chapter 7, against Rome at during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. For y'all tuning in, let me know your thoughts on that. You might have to rewind the video a few times to listen in on this. But yeah, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is a topic which isn't touched on too much because there's a lot of confusion about it. But I think if you understand Daniel chapter 7, you'll understand the Olivet Discourse, and you can understand 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and you can understand the book of Revelation. How many minutes are we into this? About 40. So we can go ahead and jump into Revelation. We'll look at some of the passages here. So we'll probably go over this again tomorrow, just to start off fresh since we're opening up the book. But Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, the revelation of Jesus Christ. And this phrase, revelation, can refer to a few different things. Either it can reveal to the revelation of Jesus Christ, as in when Jesus is revealed from heaven, right? His final coming. Or when it says the revelation of Jesus Christ, it could be a revelation which he gave. And we read that. Let's look at that language. So we read Romans 16:25. Now to him that is a power to establish you according to my gospel, reference to God and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery. Revelation means revealing, right? The revealing of the mystery, which was kept secret since the world began. And Galatians 1:12, for neither I received it of man. Paul's defending his apostleship and saying that he didn't receive these teachings that he's teaching from any man. He received them from Jesus Christ. He said he wasn't taught it, but he received his teachings by the revelation of Jesus Christ. Well, what does this mean? Well, this means that Jesus revealed it to him. And so in Revelation 1:1, the question is this talking about the final coming of Jesus Christ when he is revealed from heaven? Or is this a reference to a revelation, a teaching which Jesus revealed? Well, that is the second option. Look what it says. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him. God gave Jesus this revelation to show to his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And so this verifies for us that the revelation under consideration is a teaching. It's not a reference to the final revelation, the final coming of Jesus Christ. It says God gave this revelation to Jesus to give to his servants regarding things that must shortly come to pass. You know, the first sentence in the book tells us that the events contained in this book must shortly come to pass. And this would include the whole book. The last chapter tells us this also. That, you know, some people think, oh, chapters 20 through 22 haven't occurred yet. But the first chapter and the last chapter tell us that the things in the book must shortly come to pass. Right? So we have to understand this book. As I stated before, the coming of Christ in the book of Revelation is not a reference to his final coming. It's a reference to his coming in judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. And so these events, chapters 1 through 22, are all things which must shortly come to pass. So we have to understand the book in a way that us today, we have to understand it in a way that it's all already been fulfilled. Now, if we understand it in a literal way, then no, it hasn't been fulfilled. But is the purpose of the book to be literal? Or is the purpose of the book to be a preparation for them to prepare for the suffering that would occur under the 8th Roman emperor? Well, it's that second option. All of the chapters, right? And it says here, this is a revelation of things which must shortly come to pass. Well, is chapter 1 part of the revelation? Yes, it is. Well, then it must be full of things which must shortly come to pass. What about chapter 2? Is chapter 2 part of the revelation? Yes, it is. And therefore, it must be filled with things which must shortly come to pass. You go through chapter by chapter by chapter. Finally, you get to chapter 20. Well, is chapter 20 part of the revelation? Yes, it is. Well, then it's filled with things which must shortly come to pass. What about chapter 21 and 22? Are those part of this revelation? If so, then those must be things which must shortly come to pass. And that was 2,000 years ago. So us today having this book, right? It's its own special book. And I stated in the past few videos, it's not meant to be about the end of the world, because the teachings, so in the book of Revelation, it has a picture of the end of the world, but it's not the end of the world, the real end of the world. It's the end of the Roman world, right? It's the end of the persecutors' world. And the end of the persecutors' world has already occurred, but the end of this world has not yet occurred. We're still on it. We're still here. And so all of the events, chapters 1 through 22, are full of things which must shortly come to pass. And if you don't think so, if you think, oh, well, chapters 1 through 19 are about things which must shortly come to pass, but chapters 20 through 22, mentioning of the new heavens and new earth are not shortly come to pass, well, then you're going to have to say that they're not part of this revelation, but they are part of this revelation. We have a comment from Dave. It makes more sense. This is the revelation which God gave in that time period shortly to come. Right. And if you, let's say it this way. Gwendolyn Thomas, thank you for joining in. You missed, I think if you're just now joining in, you missed a lot of it, but we're just now jumping into Revelation chapter 1. And I appreciate you for tuning in. Hope that you have a nice day, having a nice morning. Right. And it makes sense that this is a revelation which Jesus gave of things which must shortly come to pass. Yeah. If you read verse 1, you're not going to think Jesus' final coming is under consideration as a revelation. You're going to think that the revelation is a teaching which God gave to him to show. And you would think from chapter 1 that all of the events that you're about to read about in this revelation were things that were shortly coming to pass. And so if you read the book and you drown out the noise of all these influences around you, all these commentators, right? All these teachings, if you drown out the noise of those and just read the book and take the words of the book itself, then you're going to come to a better understanding. And I mean, isn't that beautiful? I stated and it really struck me when I was saying it on video that chapters 11 through 20 mention the time of the 8th Roman emperor. Now, that's half the book. Half the book is about a time period of the 8th Roman emperor. And isn't it amazing too? Like, isn't it just, it clicks in your head, right? And you just have to understand it. It's okay. Look, it's okay if you understand this, but you don't understand the rest of the book, because we're going to get into it. But doesn't it make sense that the revelation from chapter 1 to 22 is full of things which must shortly come to pass? Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 are all full of things which must shortly come to pass. But that's not the end of the revelation. The revelation, right? The revelation's written in this book. This revelation continues in chapter 20, 21, and 22. And just as chapters 1 through 19 are part of this revelation of things which must shortly come to pass, chapters 20, 21, and 22 are part of this revelation of things which must shortly come to pass. So us today reading this book, it's already been fulfilled. So you might ask the question, Jake, are you saying that Jesus already came? Right? Not his final coming, but his coming in the book of Revelation? Yeah, he did. Revelation 19 is about the coming of Christ during the time of the 8th Roman emperor. Now, if you can understand that the coming of Christ in the book of Revelation is not a reference to the final coming, but his coming in judgment against Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor, if you understand the book of Revelation is not about the end of the world, then you're not going to have a problem. It's when you try to think about the book of Revelation about being about the end of the world, about the final coming of Christ, that's when you run into problems. But if you just read the book for what it is, drown out the outside noises, right? Trying to your what is that? Preconceived ideas about the book. If you drown that out and just come to the book knowing it's based on Daniel 7. Well, in Daniel 7, is the coming of Christ about the end of the world? No, it's not. In Daniel 7, when it mentions the Ancient of Days having a judgment scene and individuals standing before him and the books being opened and the judgment being set, that judgment in Daniel 7, is that about the end of the world? No, it's not. Okay, so if Revelation is about Daniel 7 and the coming of Christ in Daniel 7 is not the end of the world, and the judgment in Daniel 7 is not about the end of the world, then is the coming of Christ and the judgment in the book of Revelation about the end of the world? No, it's not. Well, why? Because it's based on Daniel 7. You see, if you can understand Daniel 7, it's going to help you understand the book of Revelation. Gwendolyn from YouTube saying, thanks, I will go back and start at the beginning. Cool. I appreciate you tuning in. Well, you might not hear this now if you rewound it, but we went over a lot of material. This is a lot of deep subjects, a lot of deep study. It's a lot of deep thought. You know, some people might think, oh, since the book's already all been fulfilled, is it no good for us? Well, how do you feel about the Old Testament prophets? Right? The book of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of those books, they do not necessarily apply directly to us today, but are they good for us to learn from? Yes, they are. Can we learn from them, even though they're not written directly to us? Yes, we can, right? We're not under that time period. We don't offer animal sacrifices, but can we learn from that time period that they offered animal sacrifices? Yes, we can. Just because this book has been fulfilled does not mean we cannot learn from it, right? We're learning from it already. We're learning chapters 1 through 22 were about things which must shortly come to pass. So the way that we understand the book has to be in a way, okay, you know, you even get to chapter 20 and it talks about this 1,000-year reign. Well, the 1,000-year reign, whatever it's talking about, is part of this things which must shortly come to pass. And guess what happens after that 1,000-year reign? You might think that's a long time, right? Because in chapter 19, or we're going to get into this in a few days, but you might think in chapter 19, you have it mentioning Jesus coming in judgment against the 8th Roman emperor, and then this 1,000-year reign, and then the final judgment, right? So there's a 1,000-year gap there. Well, guess what? Even though it mentions 1,000 years, Jesus came in judgment against the 8th Roman emperor. 1,000 years supposedly passes, and then here's the final judgment. That's what individuals think. Well, those things were shortly coming to pass. So that 1,000 years is part of things which must shortly come to pass. So it's not meant to be taken as a literal 1,000 years or even, in real life, a long period of time. It's symbolic in the book, just like all of the other things. They're symbolic. And so the 1,000 years isn't literally meant to mean 1,000 years. And we'll get into it. Can I explain Revelation chapter 20, verse 12? Let's go to it. Revelation 20:12. I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged of those things which were written in the books according to their works, right? And here's a picture, right? And what we've been stating this whole time is Daniel. I appreciate your comment and question. Thank you. Yeah, and we're going to get into this more in the upcoming days in chapter 20. So this is the thing. Individuals try to tell me, oh, I can tell you what chapter 20 is about. Okay, well, can you tell me what chapter 1 through 19 is about? They can't. So if you can't tell me what chapters 1 through 19 are about, then you basically can't tell me what chapter 20 through 22 is about, right? That's the end of the book. And as stated before, this is based on Daniel 7, right? We have mentioned Revelation 13, verse 2, it mentions the leopard, the bear, and the lion. Well, where do we get that from? We get that from Daniel chapter 7 as a reference to the kingdoms of the earth, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Rome, right? The first was like a lion, Babylon. Second, like a bear, which was Medo-Persia. And the third, like a leopard, which is Greece. And so what we have to understand is the book of Revelation is taking from Daniel chapter 7. And you might ask the question, right? Because Revelation 20 does have a picture of a judgment scene where individuals are standing before God being judged. Does Daniel 7 mention that? It sure does. So here's the thing which we have to remember. Chapter 20 is part of the Revelation. Well, chapter 20 is full of things which must shortly take place when the book was written. And Daniel 7 mentions a judgment scene where individuals are being judged, and it's not a reference to the final judgment. It's a reference to judgment against Rome. And so when we get to the book of Revelation is taking from Daniel 7. And since Daniel 7, the judgment is not about the end of the world. It's a judgment against Rome. That's what Revelation 20:12 is about also. It's a judgment against Rome as taken from Daniel 7. And so the way that I explained it before is Daniel 7 is the outline for the book of Revelation, right? So it's as if, say I told an artist, say I told a drawer, a painter, can you paint for me this judgment scene, right? When the Ancient of Days sits in judgment against Rome, when it says thousands ministered to him and 10,000s times 10,000 stood before him. Can you draw me a picture of this judgment where individuals are being judged? The judgment is set and the books are opened. And they say, yes, I can. They say, I can draw you a picture of judgment of Rome as described here. And they say this, I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. That's taken from Daniel 7. And Daniel 7, this isn't about the end of the world. And because this is taken from Daniel 7, this is not about the end of the world, right? The books were opened. We just read that in Daniel 7, right? Revelation says the books were opened. Look what it says in Daniel 7:10. The books were opened. Now, is Daniel 7:10 about the end of the world when the books were opened? No, it's not. What about Revelation 20:12? Well, if it's based on Daniel 7, which it is, then it can't be about the end of the world. It's a picture of judgment against Rome. And this is something, right? We're going to get into it. And I appreciate that. And what we notice is this. Where it's based on Daniel 7, where did all the world kingdoms come from? They came from the sea. 4 great beasts came up from the sea. That's where they're pictured as coming up in this vision, right? In this story, where did Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome come from? They came from the sea. And so in Revelation, look what it says. After this judgment of Rome, A new heaven and a new earth was seen. The first heaven and the first earth were passed away. And look what it says. There was no more sea. What significance does this have? Well, it's a picture of the victorious kingdom of Christ, which is an eternal kingdom. And because there's no more sea, there's going to be no more universal kingdoms on this earth. And so this is a picture of victory for the saints. It's based on Daniel 7. And I mean, look at that. There was no more sea. That's where the world kingdoms came from in Daniel 7, is from the sea. And so he pictures the victory of the saints. And it looks like, right, here's an artist painting their victory. And it looks like a world with no more universal kingdoms. But this universal kingdom is the kingdom of Christ. And so, for most people, chapters 20 through 22 are hard to get a grip, hard to get a grasp, and to understanding that it's not about the final judgment and the end of the world. And the reason why is because we've been taught that. We've been taught that chapter 20 is the final judgment. And we've been taught that because that's what it sounds like. But what individuals do when they tell you, see, here's when you run into a problem, because Revelation is based on Daniel 7, and you run into a problem when someone says, well, the judgment in Daniel 7 when the books were opened is not the end of the world judgment, but the judgment in Revelation when the books are opened, that's a reference to the final judgment. That's when you run into a problem, because you're no longer allowing Daniel 7 to be your interpretation of the book, if that makes sense. So what you want to do is you want to harmonize the two together. Right? If it's in Daniel 7, and if that's what it means in Daniel 7, then that's what it means in the book of Revelation. You can't interpret the book of Revelation without Daniel chapter 7. And so, yeah, that's a good question. So I'll admit this, chapters 20 through 22 are the hardest, but that doesn't mean they're impossible, right? Chapters 11 through 19, like, they're pretty simple. They're pretty easy to understand, especially because you have mentioned the 8th Roman emperor in all of them. So it's easy to understand. 11 through 19 is this period when the 8th Roman emperor was ruling. And then, you get to chapter 20. And we're going to get into chapter 21 after all of these chapters. But if you notice in chapter 21, it said, after this judgment and the new heavens and the new earth, there's going to be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying. But what some people don't understand, that language is used under the Old Testament. When Babylon fell under the Old Testament, they are pictured as having no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying. Well, this death, this sorrow, this crying, this pain is tied to the current persecution from the oppressor. But because the oppressor has fallen, right? That's what it said, Revelation 14, Babylon is fallen. Because the oppressor is fallen and they're given victory over the oppressor, those former things, the death that's tied to the oppression, the sorrow, the crying, the pain that's tied to that oppression, because the oppressor fell, those things are passed away. And so under the Old Testament, we'll jump into it once we come into this subject. But just because it says there's going to be no more death does not literally mean there's going to be no more death, right? Especially if the book is not about the end of the world. And in the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, we read about the fall of Babylon. And the book of Revelation calls Rome Babylon. And so we read about the fall of Babylon in the Old Testament, and it gives us this apocalyptic terminology. Well, because we read about the fall of Babylon in the book of Revelation, which is a reference to Rome, we read a lot of that same terminology. Like, for example, when Babylon fell in the Old Testament, in Isaiah 66, here's the destruction of Babylon. The Jews returned from Babylonian captivity. And look what it says. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I shall make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. When Babylon was destroyed and the Jews' oppression was over, it's pictured as a new heavens and a new earth. Well, in the book of Revelation, when the oppressor is fallen, in chapter 19, chapter 20 is a victory over the oppressor, and chapter 21 pictures a world without the oppressor. What's that look like? A new heavens and a new earth, just like Isaiah 66. Isaiah 66 pictures the fall of Babylon, and the fall of Babylon is pictured as a new heavens and a new earth for God's people. Well, in the book of Revelation, at the fall of Babylon, which is a reference for Rome in the book of Revelation, is pictured as a new heavens and a new earth for God's people. And in 2 Peter 3, right, this is where you have to understand the difference. Context is key. There's 3 times in the Bible. We're going to get into this in the upcoming videos, but there's 3 times in the Bible where a new heavens and a new earth is used. Twice it's used symbolically, once in Isaiah 66, again symbolically here in Revelation 21, but then that phrase is used literally in 2 Peter 3. And so context is key. And the reason why Isaiah 66, heavens and earth are figurative is because it's in a chapter where the context explains that it's figurative. Revelation 21, new heavens and a new earth. Why is it figurative here? Well, because the context reveals, because it's based on Daniel 7 and not the end of the world, that this is figurative. However, in 2 Peter chapter 3, we learn about the coming of Christ, and this is literal. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. And it says, nevertheless, we according to his promise look for new heavens and a new earth wherein dwelleth righteousness. This is not saying, we look forward to the time when Babylon is destroyed according to Isaiah 66, right? That's not the new heavens and the new earth that they were looking forward to, because that was in their past, right? Babylon had already fallen by that time. They're not saying, the new heavens and the new earth is a reference to Revelation 21 about the fall of Rome. That's not what they were looking forward to. The context determines that this new heavens and a new earth is a reference to going to heaven, right? When this heavens and this earth, which we're currently living on, is destroyed. And so, it's hard for some people to understand because we're so trained to think that the book of Revelation is about the end of the world. So it's hard for us to comprehend this idea that, some people might think of me as like a false teacher for saying that the judgment in Revelation 20 is not a reference to the final judgment. But I have more reason to believe it's not a reference to the final judgment than a reason to believe it is a reference to the final judgment. And we looked at some of those reasons already. For example, in 2 Peter 3, when Christ comes, heaven and earth would be destroyed at his coming. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 19, Jesus came during the time of the 8th Roman emperor, and heaven and earth were still here, it says, for 1,000 years, right? The 1,000-year reign. And then there's the judgment. But we know when Christ comes, the judgment will take place then. So the book of Revelation is not a doctrinal book about the end of the world. It is a book written to the 7 churches of Asia to prepare them for the persecution that would occur under the 8th Roman emperor. So I have more reason to believe that chapters 20 through 22 are not about the end of the world than you have reason to believe that they are, right? And we're reading the same book, and the same book says this. So here's the question. Some people say, chapters 20 through 22 haven't happened yet. So I have a question to ask you. If someone thinks that chapters 20 through 22 have not yet occurred, my question is, are chapters 20 through 22 part of the Revelation? They're going to say, yes, it is, right? Chapters 20 through 22 are part of the Revelation. Well, is the Revelation full of things which must shortly come to pass? Well, yes, it is. Well, then is chapters 20 through 22 being part of the Revelation? Is it about things which must shortly come to pass, shortly come to pass 2,000 years ago? Oh, well, no, it's not. Okay, well, you're running into a problem because the way that you're interpreting the book is not acceptable. Because if it's part of the Revelation, then it's things which must shortly come to pass. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in. We went over a lot of information today, but basically up to this point, we've been getting ready for what we're about to do. Right? We've been getting ready to dive into the book of Revelation, and we'll begin it tomorrow. We'll begin the book of Revelation tomorrow. And we might go over chapter 1, and then we can go over like chapter 4 and continuing, because chapter 2 and 3, it's just written to the 7 churches, just encouraging them to remain faithful until death. So, and they, there's some things wrong with the congregation, which they need to correct. And a lot of us are familiar with those passages, but I want us to get familiar with the passages that we're not familiar with. And that's the rest of the book, right? Most of the time when individuals quote from the book of Revelation, they're quoting from chapters 2 and 3 and a little bit from chapter 1. But I want to get into the rest of the book. Great lesson. Thank you, Dave says from Facebook. I appreciate it. Thank you. And yeah, the book's not too hard to understand. And so hopefully this will help you be aware of the false teachings of men. And I mean, if anyone else is tuning in, I know Dave said good lesson. You know, we have 5 people watching right now. Is this understandable, what I've been saying? Right? Even if you're like, man, I don't believe that yet, because you have some wiring in your head, right? Because someone told you something different and those fuses connected, and now I'm telling you something else, and you're having a hard time loosening those fuses. Right. But can you at least understand what I'm saying? Even if you don't believe it, can you understand it? It might be new, a new teaching for a lot of people. But this is the most reasonable way to understand the book. And as stated before, some people think, oh, it's about the fall of Jerusalem. Call in. I got some questions for you. Or, it's about the end of the world. Call in. I got some questions for you, not in a way where I'm going to laugh at you or make fun of you, or I hope you don't do the same to me. I just like a conversation so the community can listen in and share your thoughts. But there's no way it's about the fall of Jerusalem. There's no way it's about the end of the world. What is the only answer that's left? Well, it's about Daniel 7. Daniel 7 is not about the fall of Jerusalem. Daniel 7 is not about the end of the world. Right? It's about the fall of Rome, pictured during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. So I appreciate everyone tuning in. Most importantly, this is just a book study we're going over. But for those listening, I had a conversation yesterday with someone, and he commented and asked me a question about something I said about the book of Revelation. I answered this question, and then I wanted to change subjects, about what church are you a member of? If you're not a member of the church, I don't want to talk about the book of Revelation with you. I want to talk about the Bible with you, about New Testament doctrine, about what we must do to be saved. Because even if we come to a common understanding on the book of Revelation, if I don't convince you to become a Christian, it's not really doing any good. Right? So this to me is less important than helping someone be converted to becoming saved and receiving the forgiveness of their sins. And I mean, some people do have a disagreement about the book of Revelation. Even, people who I know, Christians who I know, have a different understanding. Now, I'm not like, you're a false teacher for not believing that it's about this, because I agree that if you're just learning it and you're not familiar with Daniel 7, that it is hard to understand and difficult to understand. But I'm not going to let someone convince me that it's something different, right? If you tell me it's something, well, I got a question for you. But the book having already been written, having already been fulfilled, I think we can come to an understanding on it. But it's just, are you willing to learn, right? I've had a conversation with Christians that I know who I want to explain some of these things, but like I said, those fuses are wired in their head that they're like, nah, this is about the fall of Jerusalem, or no, this is about the end of the world, that it's hard really to have a conversation about it, because as individuals say, which they shouldn't be, but kind of hard-headed, right? But Christians shouldn't have that attitude. We should be willing to study. And me, having never learned the book, I used to think it was about the rapture, right? I never read it. That's what people told me. And understanding it's not about the rapture. What is it about? I explored the idea. Is it about the fall of Jerusalem? No, it's not. Well, is it about the end of the world? No, it's not. Well, then what could it possibly be about? If it's not about the rapture, if it's not about the destruction of Jerusalem, if it's not about the end of the world, what could it be about? Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7 is stated before. If you learn, I mean, it makes me happy, It makes me, and even when I had a son, his name is Josiah Daniel. But when I had a son, I always thought, once I learned this, I want to name him Daniel 7, right? Daniel 7 Thornton, because it's like a key chapter. And I mean, I thought that was a pretty good name, but it didn't turn out to be that way. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in today, for watching in. We have 5 viewers, so going up. We usually have on average 1 to 4 viewers, so now we have 5. So I appreciate you tuning in. Tomorrow we'll dive more into the book of Revelation. Basically what we learned is that the Bible talks about, in Daniel 7, a fall of Rome during the time of their 8th Roman emperor. It's talked about in the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and it's explained in 2 Thessalonians 2 that the end of the world could not happen, the final coming of Christ could not happen until this be fulfilled. And now that this is fulfilled, guess what? Christ could come at any time, at any moment. And we need to be ready and prepared for that. As the scriptures say, it will be as a thief in the night. You know, babies are being born right now. And there's babies being born every second, multiple babies being born on this planet every second. And when Christ comes, he will come at a time when babies are being born. And you might not think that. You know, that's going to be a surprise that what? The world's going to end as soon as this baby is being born. You know, that's what Luke 21 says. It's going to be a snare. It's going to be a trick to all those who dwell on the face of the earth. You know, you give birth to a son and he comes out, or a daughter, and you think, man, I'm going to have time to lay here with them and cuddle them and take them home. But I mean, the Bible says heaven and earth could pass away anytime. So you don't have that hope. You don't have that set in stone, you know, that's going to occur. So now that these things have been fulfilled, Jesus could come at any time, and Jesus has promised to save those who believe the gospel message, his death, burial, resurrection, and who believe and obey him. Hebrews 5:9, he's the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. And Jesus said in Mark 16:16, whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Acts 2:38 says baptism is for the forgiveness of sins. And it's not baptism only that saves. It's not faith only, not belief only that saves, but it's faithful obedience and doing what the Lord has said. And Jesus said, whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. Romans 16:16 says the churches of Christ salute you. If you go to the website, orville530.com, you can type in, it says find a church of Christ near you. You click that, type in your area code, and it'll show you a congregation in your area. If you live in Butte County in the Orville community, I'd love to have a Bible study with you, have you assemble with us and observe the way that we worship God in spirit and truth. May God bless you as you search for truth. And until tomorrow morning, we're going to dive into the book. We'll start in chapter 1 and we'll go through the book together. And if you have any questions, we could try to answer them along the way. And as stated before, this might be something new, a new concept for you, but this is the way that it best makes sense, right? And if you believe differently, call in or question in the comments below so we could see it. But I got some questions for you. And I hope you have some questions for me too. You know, I hope people don't just think, oh, Jacob Thornton, he's a good teacher, therefore I'm going to believe everything that he says. No, don't do that either. You know, study what I say and study it out. Well, I appreciate y'all. God bless y'all. And I pray that I think on good things today. Try to be the best husband you could be, best wife you could be, best parent you could be, best child you could be, and the best employer or employee that you could be. Be the best neighbor that you could be today. God bless you. On Facebook, in the search bar, type Bible Search Program. Click on the page, then click the like button. Press the 3 buttons, press following, and next to feed, click default and change it to favorites. Next to posts, click highlights and change it to standard. Next to videos, click highlights and change it to all. Next to live videos, click highlights and change it to all. On YouTube, in the search bar, type Bible Search Program, then click subscribe. Press the bell button to set up the notifications. It might take you to your phone settings where you need to press notifications and toggle the switch to allow notifications. Then go back to the YouTube app and press the bell again. Then select all. On Twitch, in the search bar, type Bible Search Program. Click follow, then select the bell. It might take you to your phone settings where you need to press notifications and toggle the switch to allow notifications. Then go back to the Twitch app and press the bell so that it's no longer crossed out. On Twitter, in the search bar, type Call Me Live Now. On my profile page, press follow, then select the bell. Afterwards, press only tweets with live videos. If you would like to support the program, and if you have the funds to do so, you can help promote this work for the kingdom by donating one time or more than one time, such as monthly. All funds donated go directly to advertisement only. I invest in my own personal funds, $50 per month. I keep none of the money donated, and it is spent immediately on advertisements only. If you'd like to donate via Facebook, Venmo, PayPal, Apple Cash, Google Play, Samsung Pay Cash, check, cash, or any other way, please comment, send a message, or text or call me so I can provide you with that information. My phone number is 530-358-0400. May God bless you as you search his